Name, age, and birthplace.
My name is Gary Beasley. My age is 62, almost 63. My birthplace is Gardena, California.
Were you really born in Gardena, no, Torrance?
Yes.
I didn't know that.
No, we lived in Gardena.
Oh, that explains a lot.
I was born at Gardena Memorial.
Oh, I thought you were born in Torrance Memorial.
That's why I liked eating the Tijuana food and worked at Hitco for 20 years.
Do you consent to this interview for educational purposes only? I will not sell this on eBay.
Well, I'm insulted that you won't sell it on eBay, but yes, I do consent. Not a problem. I would prefer it to be sold someplace. Possibly the dark web.
What was it like growing up in California? Is there anything in particular that you remember?
Well, I remember the covered wagons. They were good.
Failed this.
The covered wagons. Ma and Pa. we had a little house on the prairie. And Sis went on to be a Directors Guild of America president.
I need something to write my paper with here. Help me out.
Don't worry, we'll have you paper trained by the end of this interview without a problem. Paper training is easy. I'm still working on it. Let's see, I was born in Gardena, California. My dad was an aerospace worker his entire life. My mother was a homemaker, so far her entire life. She's still alive. As you well know, my father passed away earlier this year at the age of 89. My mother is 87 years old and going strong. I grew up in, for the most part, Torrance, California. I went to Torrance schools, Arnold Elementary, South High in Torrance. I did a little bit of El Camino, but I ended up volunteering at the Cabrillo Marine Museum in San Pedro, California, and then later working for the Los Angeles Department of Rec and Parks for 5 years as a marine aquarist. And that was a part-time / full-time job. I did that in order to support myself because my parents had decided to leave the state of California and move back east. I met your mom when I was volunteering at the museum, Susanna Beasley. And at that time she was Susanna Jungers. And she was volunteering and I was working at the museum. And we hit it off. She's the only girl I ever went out with and the only girl I ever dated. And the only girl I ever kissed. So that's pretty good. We married when I was 21 and she was 19. And we had our first child about 6 years later. And then we had the other one, born in 1989, named Alyssa.
I've heard of her.
My parents told me just as I was getting out of high school that they had decided to move back east, and they gave me the alternative of staying here with $1,300 in my pocket or moving with them back east. And naturally I was in love with your mother because I dated her by that time for a few years, and I opted to stay here. For the point in history, your mom's dad was a World War II veteran. He was a Pearl Harbor veteran. He was actually on an escort ship that was out of Pearl Harbor at the time it was attacked. And your grandmother didn't know whether he was alive for about 9 months because it was top secret as to whether those ships were actually out there. He retired from the Navy and he was in the Navy a petty officer. He did electrical work. CPO, Chief Petty Officer. And when he got out of the Navy, he became an electrician. And that was his livelihood until he retired. When I met him, and that was when your mother and I were seniors in high school, He was critically ill with cancer because when he was in the service as the Navy electrician, they had assigned him to New Mexico, where they were doing the nuclear testing at the time, and everybody that was in the service with him ended up dying of cancer. He was no exception. He lived to see your mother graduate, and 3 weeks after her graduation, he passed away. Your mom and I lived on and off with your grandmother and her disabled brother for a number of years. And before you guys were born, we established our own residence. What's your next question? Or would you like more?
Is there anything in particular you remember about childhood in California?
Yeah, childhood, I was a loner. I would go to school every day. I was very quiet. I wouldn't say I had a lot of friends. I really didn't have friends. At lunchtime, when everybody went out to have lunch and sit at the benches and go play baseball or play on the field, since I was very close to home, I would walk home and my dad would make me lunch. My dad worked second shift, and if I didn't go home and see him at lunchtime, I wouldn't see him at all, because he would leave at 3 o'clock and come home after midnight. Well, I loved my dad and I wanted to be able to see him, so I came home every day. And when the peers that I grew up with, the kids, were doing baseball and playing games, I was at home with my dad. So when I came back to school, I never made a lot of friends. I was always everybody knows me, even people from school know me now. But they didn't really know me because I didn't participate in their activities. We had a drama club at school in 6th, 7th, and 8th grade, and we participated in those kind of things. But as far as going forward with friendships and long-term friendships, not really. The best friend I've had my whole life is your mom. I was lucky she took a chance. Or she's crazy. We're not sure yet.
Both, probably. Do you notice a lot of differences about Torrance now versus then?
Oh, Torrance has changed. But the entire nation and the world's changed. When 911 happened, that was the biggest change probably of all. Security went up. But Torrance was a changing demographic because when I was young, where Honda, the American headquarters of Honda Corporation is now, there was Armco Steel. There was a lot of industrial work down there. Well, Armco Steel, as a matter of fact, the company I worked for, Hitco, was owned by Armco Steel for a while. Armco Steel ended up going into bankruptcy. Luckily, we were sold before that to Owens Corning. I worked in aerospace my entire life, and one thing you know about aerospace is about every 4 years you're spun off into another company. It's always in a state of flux. The companies never stay long. I was lucky. My dad, after he had moved back east, stayed friends with some of the co-workers out here, and he let me know when a job came open in a calibration lab, which is part of quality assurance. And I interviewed for that job, and I was lucky enough to get it. I was young, and I had a really good boss, and I worked for Hitco for 20 years in the quality assurance calibration laboratory, and I became the lead over the electrical, mechanical, pressure, and vacuum. I ran the show. And I was lucky. I made good friends there, and I would have stayed there my entire life, except that times change. And they decided that they were going to outsource the calibration and instrumentation portion of the job. So we were notified, and within 30 days we were out. And I had 19 years and 11 months of service. With 20 years, I would have gotten 4 weeks of vacation, so I always thought about that. I ended up working with one of my friends as an independent painter for about 6 months, but that didn't really work out because my friend didn't really like to work. He liked it.
Yeah, we know that.
He didn't have to worry. So I ended up going to work for another company and doing the same thing. I took one of the people that I had worked with at HIDCO had moved on to another aerospace company, and he wanted to bring their calibration in-house because it would be inherently cheaper for them to run. So what they did is they made a bid for me to come over to their facility and bring calibration back in-house, buy the equipment, and it was history. And from 1995 until 1998, I ran the calibration lab at Kaiser Compositech. And from there on in, it became United Defense, BAE Systems, Encore, and Composites, and now it's called Applied Composites. I was laid off from that job on the 29th of January of this year, and I haven't gone out to be reemployed since then. I've looked, but I haven't found the job that I wanted. On January the 29th, also, I found out that my dad was seriously ill, and for the next few months, I spent a lot of time back east in order to help him through hospice, transition, and then his death.